You who stayed, we wanted to make sure that we had answers to as many of these questions as possible, so we'll get through what we can get through by 5 o'clock. So these questions have been grouped by topic, by general topic. So I'm going to take them that way with the newest questions first, so if anyone who asked them is still listening in or here in person, hopefully you'll hear your question answered. Okay. One question asked about, with Windermere High School being at capacity, what is being done about moving the project up 2 years? So as we discussed in the presentation, it takes about 5 years to build a high school, and that process has already begun for that school. The planning is almost finished, and actually in November we're going to have our first design meeting. So we're already within that 5-year window, and so it needs to open in 2022. We also checked the projections, and in 2020, Windermere High School would have about 1,000 excess students, which would not be enough for high school. High school has about 2,700 students, and it would not be an efficient use of tax dollars to open a high school with 1,000 kids. It would not have all of the classes and extracurricular activities that parents have come to expect. There was a question about Bridgewater's capacity, and that school is being relieved next year. There was also a question about why there aren't a lot of middle schools on the 10-year list, and let me go back to that list so that we can be looking at that. Here we go. So Site 37 will relieve Bridgewater next fall. And as Jessica pointed out, our CIP, our capital improvement plan, our 10-year list is a living document that is looked at every year. And if the projections tell us that we need more middle schools within this window, that is something that could be changed next year, depending on the projections. Yeah, Site 65 is one of the middle schools on here that's coming up, and that's 11th on the list. And then number 15 and number 17 are also middle schools that are on the list. Number 15 and 17 on the list, not their site numbers.
And
Laura, did you
Lauren,
want to add
if I may, for Horizon West specifically, if we're looking at additional middle schools in that area, again, as I mentioned earlier, Horizon West was initially established with 3 middle schools. We have Bridgewater, we have our Site 37, and then we have our Site 65. So you have those school sites that are already within our 10-year CIP. So keep in mind, if Horizon West was an isolated area and you weren't getting students that were in Horizon West schools or outside of that area, then you wouldn't necessarily need it. The area was planned for a total of 3 middle schools, again, assuming that no other kids are coming in that area. But that's not what's happening. We're having growth on the north, we're having growth on the east side, and even a little bit to the southeast side. So those students are coming into your Horizon West area, which is why we need that additional middle school. Our real estate department identifies that need. We are searching for an additional middle school site in the Horizon West area, and it's right now it's not in our 10-year CIP, but again, this, as Lauren mentioned, this is a living document. So next year you may see an additional middle school in our 10-year CIP if our enrollment projections can support that middle school.
Okay, and while we've got you, Laura, we have a question along the same lines that's asking, if OCPS didn't determine in Horizon West where the schools will go, who did?
So the Horizon West was actually, it was a sector plan that was adopted in the 90s. The county and the developers, they came up with this sector plan and decided where each of the elementary schools and middle school and high school would come. If you saw that, there was only one high school site, and you can tell, anyone who's there knows that we need 2 high school sites in this area. So this is something we're working with them on. Unfortunately, a lot of the zoning was approved back in the 2000s, so that's when your school sites were actually established. OCPS's input at that time was to say, these are our enrollment projections, these are the school sites that we're going to need, the numbers of school sites, but it wasn't necessarily where the locations were going to be. So now, the only way that OCPS has the ability to change the location of a school site for Horizon West would be if a developer came back in to amend or come up with a new plan development zoning approval. So when they come in at that time, then OCPS essentially gets a bite at the apple to be able to say, okay, you need to move your elementary school here, or you need to move it here. So one of the main issues for us is, again, they select our sites, but it's really not necessarily just the location of the site, it's really that infrastructure. They're driving the train as far as when they get that infrastructure to us. So we may want to proceed with an elementary school site, like I saw when we went over the site selection, we may have wanted to proceed with Site 47, but it's off the table for us because that developer is not ready. And that's where OCPS's hands are really tied.
Okay. I'm going to merge two questions we got that's related to projections. One was implying that our calculations are not accurate, so I want Tommy to address that. And then the other question, somebody seemed to see somewhere that we had a school projected to hit 2,000 students at the elementary level, and Tommy's going to explain what that might have been and how accurate our projections have been.
Okay, sure. Every year, district-wide, we're within 1% of error of our projections and enrollment. For each individual school, the vast majority are within 5% for each individual school. So we do have accurate projections. Every so often, we're a little off. When Windermere High School came in, they surprised us. We actually put in our formula. We knew that students were in that area were exercising their choice option to go to other schools. And so we added things into our formula to make assumptions that a lot of these students would come back. Well, Windermere High School exceeded our formula vastly. So that's why we review our CIP every year, and we can make adjustments and then move schools and make adjustments to schools when needed. As far as the school going up to 2,000, if you look at, and we're pulling up the timing tool that I showed you, and I'm just going to go to the first school that's on here. Let's take a look at Tangelo Park. Tangelo Park, if you look at their projections, they go from 731, 722, 806, and then they keep going on up to 845. Actually, we're going to relieve that school in 2020, so that enrollment at that school is going to drop at that time. But the reason we leave that high projection there is we can show that that school is warranted. And so if you go to my projections online, you're going to see schools going up to 2,000. You're going to see King's Crossing is going to go up to probably an outrageous number, but it includes all that development that's in that current zone for King's Crossing. But we do have a number of schools in our plan that are going to relieve that school, and when we get the attendance zones, we'll have more of an idea what that projection will be.
Okay, and so Tommy, if I could just summarize what you said on Keene's Crossing. If you go and look at our projections on Keene's Crossing, we keep counting up as if we hadn't relieved the school so that we can show that there's enough growth to warrant that additional school. So even though potentially, 400 students are going to be removed, they're not getting removed in this number, so that we can continue to watch where it would be going. And that will only be updated when that school opens. So it does make it look like it's going that big, but that's not a real number of students that will ever attend that school because that relief will happen. So hopefully that helped. We were asked, what can we do to better locate schools in walkable locations, and how can we make better connections to surrounding neighborhoods for people walking and biking? Julie, can you help us with this one?
So we do try to build schools in walkable locations whenever possible. Unfortunately, jurisdictions don't always approve plans for walkable communities, so we have to kind of do the best we can. Most of the new developments that are being approved in Orange County and by the different cities that are large scale and large enough to warrant a school do tend to be walkable. They tend to follow some new urbanist principles of walkability and connectivity. So we are very happy to put schools in those communities, and we're able to work with the developers early on. But we do have some areas in the county where there's been some demographic shifts that require us to do infill schools, and those areas are already established. They still need schools, so we have to kind of fit in as best we can. We do require developers, when we're reviewing developments, to make connections to schools if they come in adjacent to a school. We do request bike and pedestrian connections to those schools, and we're usually pretty successful. I think we are pretty successful in creating walkable schools. It looks, from the outside, it might look like we're not because there's so many cars and the parking lots are big, but if you dig a little deeper, I think you'll see that a lot of our schools are actually very walkable.
Okay. Oh, you want to add, Pam? Mhm.
I do want to add to that one. I know that as parents, we're very, very cautious about letting our kids walk to school and ride to school, especially when there's a lot of construction going on around. But as your schools settle down and settle in, please start walking and riding with your kids and letting them ride with their neighbors. It helps tremendously with the school culture. It helps with their health, and it also tremendously helps with our traffic management. So that's my personal plea.
Thank you, Pam. Now I want to take a couple questions that came in on comment cards. And this one, I'm going to defer to our board members on this question. Can you be more specific about actions residents can take to encourage more state funding be provided to OCPS, especially versus charter schools?
You want to go first?
Okay. Thank you. Just as we do, I would urge our residents to be in touch with their representatives, state and federal, but mainly state, for representatives and senators. And when we look to vote, that should be a concern that they ask of the candidates. Do you support more funding for schools? I wanted to say we received the accurate acronym, or the meaning. It's Public Education Construction Outlay. Capital outlay. And yes, capital outlay. And Orange County got $2.3 million this year, compared to the charter schools who received over $6 million. How many charter schools do we have here? We have got maybe 40?
About that.
About 40 charter schools. The other question that came in was in regard to lottery money, and we don't receive any funding for capital outlay through the lottery.
Thank you for addressing that. Then I don't have to get it separately.
And I want to follow up on Daryl, what people can do. So we put out a legislative platform, and so do the superintendents from the state put out a legislative platform, and they usually are very close. So there are specific things within that legislative platform that you can champion every year with your legislators. And it's good, especially as we're going to come into another cycle this November of elections, to bring those questions and those topics forward to those running for office. And then there are things that we always need. One is not to have our local rollback, our local contribution roll back when the state is in a growth, and to not take surplus dollars and bank them when our reserves for the state are fully funded, but reinvest those back into schools and infrastructure. And the third thing is start to unmandate things so that we have more flexibility within the community so that we can move faster. a lot of times, as you heard here today, there's so many layers of legislation on just one thing we have to do and to get through that. We need to roll back some of those layers of legislation so that we can be more speedboat-like than battleship dragging the hull like. So the rollback is a local contribution that we put in, and it's in your annual tax base on your property taxes. And in order to keep that property tax flat, which I think we figured out, and don't quote me on this one, but I think it was about $100 or $125 on average per household or something like that. It was not a substantial amount of money, but when you add it all up, it makes a lot of money for your local area that could have been invested into not as much capital, but more operational for teacher salaries and so on and so forth. So that's what that is. And we have information about the rollback on our website, and you certainly can find it just by looking up the local contributions and see what those percentages are in your community. But that's important. This is infrastructure. This is our future. This is our workforce, and we've got to invest.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to see how many of these I can just take and get through, because we've been getting even new questions and we've got quite a long list left. This question is, can you shine a light on the urban legend that OCPS can't plan a school until existing schools that are a certain percent over capacity? So for that one, I actually want to keep this slide up, because as you can see, we're looking at the capacities of every school every year. And we have relief planned for schools that are over capacity of far smaller percentage than 150%. It just depends, as we were discussing in the presentation, if there's enough students within an area to justify an entire school. And absolutely, and Carol reminded me, and that there's the funding to do so. And that actually gets to another question that just came in here. If we know within a 1% margin of error what the projections will be, why are the schools so continuously overcrowded? Well, like we said, there has to be some overcrowding to generate enough students to open a new school, because it's not efficient to open a school that's largely empty. But there's also funding issues that we do not have, even though we're more generously funded because of our voters than some municipalities. There's still a limit to how many schools that we can build with the funds that we have. When we're growing at a pace of 5,000 students a year, which is what typically has been happening in OCPS, that's the equivalent of almost 2 high schools by itself. And you saw how long we have to save to build 2 high schools. To about 2,700 is a high school. So
the other challenge that we have is that crowding is concentrated, not completely concentrated, but it is more prevalent in the Lake Nona and the Horizon West area. So it's balancing the needs of the entire county to the needs of high growth areas. There is a balance, because we're going through redevelopment through all of Orange County. We're a very blessed county that we've had a dynamic recovery out of the recession, and we've been able to see a lot of inner city as well as rural and suburban areas, expand and develop. So it is a balancing act.
Okay. Thank you, Pam. There was also a question about why, and there were several questions on the same topic that I'm combining. Why can't the school district stop new construction of homes until schools catch up? And so I want to give Julie an opportunity to explain the timing of that.
Sure.
And why that is the way it is.
So the way development approvals occur with the local governments, a developer, a property owner, is entitled to go through a specific process. And at the end of that process, they will get an approval or denial. We are part of that process. We work with the developer to identify any school capacity deficiencies. The tool that we use is the mitigation agreement. And we use that so that we can get the additional mitigation funds from that developer. It helps us track the development, so I can give that information to Tommy. He can include it in his projections. But the most important part for us is we are notified of when that project goes to plat. We're able to collect that additional mitigation dollars. We're able to track the impact fee payments. But for us to stop that development, if we objected to the development, we would never get any of that money. So we only get the impact fee money, we only get the capital contribution dollars if that development moves forward. So it's kind of a chicken and an egg dilemma that we have, but that's what we have to work with.
Thank you, Julie. Well put. Carol, I just need potentially a little backup on this one. How early and what determines the special programs or focus of a planned school? My understanding is that does not occur until the school opens, and then they can offer a local program for a year, and then if they wish to become a magnet, it would be after that. Anybody want to add to that or correct me?
It is a process that's handled through the Office of School Choice if they want to offer something different, and it's very specific, and I'm not the expert in that one, but I could tell you that it does take time to put the program in and get it going.
And I would also
Yeah.
like to comment, if people have ideas for what they think would work well in any geographic area, because we have a great corporate partner or an industry in the area, and they think the school in that area should look at that, just send that information to me and we'll make sure that that gets put into the hopper. And that's true for all of our board members. You can send that information to your representative and they'll ensure not only school choice gets it, but they also can then kind of look at where those potential partners might be and see if they can help bring those partners to the table.
Okay. Thanks, Pam. We have a question. Why are schools not built bigger to handle the expected populations, especially when you clearly know how many kids will be attending them? Okay, so I want to go to two things with that. One is that since 2004, we've been guided by a study which set our prototype sizes, so that's been a consistent number. And second, as Tommy showed on the sunrise slide, there's a life cycle for schools. They typically peak during that's the initial expansion that is going on, and that's when we're relieving those schools. If we build the school for, let's say, an elementary school for 1,200 students, which we would not be able to do under our guidelines right now, but if we did, that school would have a capacity for 1,200 students even when it dipped to 600 students, and it becomes wasteful. And it seems like from the parents that we talk to, they don't like it when their schools are that big, and so if our long-term intent is to relieve them, if their capacity is that big, they have to hit an even higher bar to be relieved, if that makes sense. If we're building the school to 1,200, getting to 1,200 means no relief. If we build the school to 800 and 1,200 come, 400 of those students will eventually be peeled off somewhere else if another elementary school nearby is in a similar situation. Anyone else want to add to that? Daryl?
I do. I think if you had larger schools and you'd have larger zones, and with the potential of minimizing the community or neighborhood aspect of a school. And as we know, and my child went to large schools all of his school career, it is tough when you have one cafeteria, one play field, and I feel for the schools who do have to mitigate that aspect with large numbers. But that is the reason why you don't want larger ones. And I represent an area that's not only high growth, but I also represent schools who have had drastic declines in their student enrollments, and with funding, it causes some challenges. They just don't have that extra money for different projects. They really have to be creative. So I think that's one of the reasons, if you think about it. It's like in some areas of the United States where they started consolidating schools because they didn't have enough kids in each of them, and kids were on the bus for an hour and a half to go to a consolidated school. So we still value the aspect of a community neighborhood school.
Okay, thank you, Daryl. We received a question about Windermere High and its capacity, and before I hand this over to Tommy, I want to merge it with another question. We received a question about how the crowding there is to be addressed in the short, medium, and long term. In the long term, being 5 years, we are planning to open a relief high school. In the very short term, we are planning portables. And did you want to speak to the intermediate?
Sorry. As some of you guys may know, when Windermere High School was approved, it was actually, there was a condition on that site that states that we can only have so many portables, that it's a set location. So what we're doing right now to address that condition is we're reaching out to the county, we're working with them to try to see if we can modify that condition, which will allow you to get some additional portables on that site. Again, we know it's not ideal, we know that we don't necessarily want kids in portables, but at the same rate, we couldn't open, and we can't justify opening a school with a high school with 400 or 600 students. So we are working for that 2022 date. So.
Okay, and there's an additional question about the projections for Windermere High School. So.
Sure, and I was just going to say what Laura Kelly just said, and it is going to get up to 4,028 by the time we're slated to relieve it. We've had other schools, West Orange High School got up to, I believe, 4,400 before we had to relieve it.
Before we had the funds to relieve it.
Before we had the
yes.
funds to relieve it, yes. And so, yes, and I'm glad we're looking at intermediate solutions for this with the portables.
Okay. There was a question that's kind of off topic, asked about a gifted elementary school in the West. That's not currently in the planning, but that's something that, could always be considered. There's another question about the timing of our community meetings. Now, while this meeting was at 3 o'clock, most of our community meetings are held at 6 o'clock out at the schools because the principals have indicated to us that that's a time that tends to work for their parents. If you live in a community where 6 o'clock does not work and you have a school relief project coming up, please share that with your principal so that they can give us that feedback. We've actually had some schools where they wanted to do it at 3, that they felt that was better because parents would pick up their students and then come right over. So the idea with this one was that it would be after school, but before dinner, and that another primary reason was that we wanted to film this, and so we knew that we wouldn't get a huge number of people who are able to make it in person, but that we will have videos that will live on where we'll be able to answer these questions for people. Okay, there's a question about the Windermere High School stadium and issues with that stadium. Laura, did you want to address that?
Sure. OCPS is aware of the conditions and the concerns about Windermere High School Stadium. One thing I do want to make clear is that is on property that's owned by the county. The reason that it is an offsite stadium, as many of you may know, is it was part of a negotiated settlement agreement with the county. For us to be able to move forward with Windermere High School, we ended up having to have a give and take, and part of that was we agreed to an offsite stadium. We understand there's some issues. We're working with the county as best we can. As many of you know, Ms. Gould was working with Commissioner Vanderlei to have temporary bleachers placed on the site for the home football games this year. We are looking at the issue and trying to ensure that we can address each of the parking issues, the transportation issues as they come up.
Okay. We had a number of questions, Laura, while you're on, that came up about Whispering Oak and crowding there. Could you fill us in on what's going on with Whispering Oak?
For Whispering Oak, we have a school slated to open, which is our site 89. That would be the relief school for that site. It's currently in 2023. This is one, I can tell you, I'm a Whispering Oak parent, so I would love for it to be earlier too. However, this is actually a school that the infrastructure is driving us a little bit on our timing. The site that we have, our site 89, it doesn't have the infrastructure to it, mainly the utilities. The utilities alone would cost about $2 million to get to this site. $2 million OCPS doesn't have. So the issue is we have to wait for the developers to bring those utilities to that site. We're anticipating that around 2022, those utilities should be at the site of a sufficient capacity to serve our school. So that's why we have it there for 2023. Again, we review this annually, so if for whatever reason the developer tells us those utilities will be there tomorrow, you may see that something may change in your CIP.
Okay. There were a number of questions about crowding and why we're not building sooner. I think we addressed those, but really the key piece for anyone who's just tuning in now for the first time is funding. There's only so much money to go around and a great amount of need with an average of 4,000 to 5,000 new students coming in every year. There is going to be some wait time for opening new schools just because there are so many needs across the county. There are a couple questions that I think were explained, but might need a little more reiteration, from Julie. There was a question of whether builders contribute infrastructure, funding, how the impact fees are calculated, and whether we can adjust the amount of fees we charge to cover things like the 2 high schools.
Sure. So, and I know there was a question specifically about how the impact fee is calculated. The impact fee is calculated based on a cost per student station. And so every 2 to 4 years, we have a consultant come in and look at all of our costs, cost of construction, cost to provide transportation, cost to provide everything that we need to build on the capital side to provide that student station at a school, a brand new building. That cost is then developed and it is multiplied by the student generation rate. And that's how we sort of prorate that cost for each housing unit. So for example, the student generation rate, which is a district-wide average of how many students are generated per household for a single family unit, is 0.419. So we'll take the cost per student station, multiply it by the student generation rate, and that's how we come up with our impact fee. And that impact fee is charged for each housing unit. A single family has its own fee, a townhouse has its own fee, and a multifamily unit within an apartment has its own fee. And so those are all paid at the time of building permit. When we do a mitigation agreement with a developer, we charge a little bit extra, and that's also determined as part of that impact fee study, what that additional cost is, because there's a little bit of a deficiency between the actual cost per student station and the impact fee. We are actually about to start a new impact fee study. We're going to be starting that in the next 30 to 60 days. We have a sort of a stakeholder group that's going to be reviewing the methodology. That study the results will go to public hearing before the school board. It'll go before the Board of County Commission. There will be at least 2 public hearings during that process. So I really encourage people to get involved and show up at those meetings and, voice your opinion on that fee. Our website, it's planning.ocps.net. We will have updates to the impact fee study schedule as it goes on, and we'll have all those dates posted on our website, or you can just contact me anytime for information on that.
Okay, and so we're going to wrap up in about 5 minutes. So let me see how much we can get through in that time. There are several rezoning questions, so I'm going to try to summarize them. Several questions ask, essentially, when schools in one area are getting a lot of development, why aren't they rezoned to schools nearby that are either at capacity or a little bit below? And then there was a question about whether you can transfer your child into a school that's at capacity. And lastly, there was a question about capping enrollment. I'll take the capping enrollment one if you want to talk about the zoning. There was an email saying that this parent wanted enrollment capped at their child's school. And as a public school system, we cannot turn away children who come. And just like, all of these parents were not turned away when they arrived, other children will not be turned away when they arrive. We just need to, use portables in the short term. And as soon as the funding catches up, we open new schools. But I'll let Carol answer the zoning piece.
Okay, 2 parts. Let's do the capacity piece first about if you can transfer your child. We have a transfer window every year. It runs from February 1st to May 31st. At that time, there's a transfer available called the Controlled Open Enrollment Capacity Transfer. We have a list of schools that have capacity as defined by the school district. And then we post that, and you can apply for that transfer. If there's 50 seats at the school and 45 people apply, everybody gets in, but if there's 55, we run a lottery. And so that's a transfer that allows families to move to schools that have capacity. This list changes every year. As you could see from any of our enrollments, and what Tom showed with Sunrise, things go up and down. So the list for schools that are on here changes yearly. So do look at that, because that does give you some good options. The other part about rezoning, if your school's overcrowded to another school who's not as overcrowded. Well, the short answer to that would be, sure, we can do that. But generally, we don't when we know that there's a relief school coming, because that very well could mean that you and your children are moved twice within a very short time, to provide some short-term relief. We do have instances like when you see for Horizon West, we have 25 and 49 opening, and then the next year we'll have 85 opening. And that will mean that some families will move twice, but it's moving twice to a new school and a new school. And we do have a transfer in place for that to help families out if they need to. So we work with our families on that. So short-term answer, sure, we could do that. Is it really the best thing to do? Generally, the answer is no. So it's a school-by-school situation and how long things will be.
Thank you. And Carol, a lot of times families don't want to be rezoned. Is that fair?
Oh, yeah.
So
Yeah,
just making
it's-
that point also, that
I
those are
think-
not pretty.
I think Ms. Flynn described rezoning the best. You want to say your phrase? She just implies that no one likes it. It's really kind of like, it's painful no matter what you do. People are not happy to stay or to go, and it's very difficult for families.
It's either painful or excruciating. Those are the two types.
Say it again.
No, you've got two type, either painful or excruciating. It's those two. It's one of the two.
Yeah, somebody's always unhappy.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to try to hit 2 more categories of questions and then close, and we can certainly stay and take one-on-one questions. There's a question about how it is safe or legal to have an elementary school at double its capacity. Jessima, can you help us with this one?
Sure. So when a school gets overcrowded, we add portables. And the thing about portables that we want people to realize is that a portable is manufactured and installed per our Florida building code. So we have to install a portable, manufacture a portable using the same codes that we do for our permanent building. We make sure that all of the safety requirements and safeguards are in place regarding a portable. It goes through the same permitting process. It goes through the same with our building code official to get that portable approved for installation. And in addition, our portables are built, the inside of our portables have the same furniture as with a permanent classroom. So it's the same whether it's a portable or permanent. We go through all the safeguard and the safety requirements and the permitting processes like we do for a permanent structure.
Thank you. The last category of questions that I'm going to tackle here is transportation and traffic. There were a number of questions about traffic at schools that are either growing or are large. I can say that when we build new schools, that we have definitely greatly added to the amount of what we call queuing, the conga line that parents go through before dropping off their children, because over the years, many of our schools that we're replacing now were built 50 years ago. They had these little tiny parent drop-off areas. So as we replace those schools, we make those longer, and all of our new schools have longer lines. Another thing that I want to mention with the traffic is that, the idea that has come up, why don't you just build elementary schools larger? It also contributes to traffic problems in the long term. We're well aware that it's not ideal that there are traffic problems in the short term, but if you leave a school permanently at a larger size, you really can't make those issues go away. So that's another reason for the prototype size that we have. And for the questions there are several questions about pedestrian access and traffic studies and how those work and what we can be doing about those things that I'm going to hand over to Julie.
Sure. OCP OCPS has a few internal.
Oh, your mic's not on.
Sorry. OCPS has a few internal processes that we use to address site-specific traffic problems. First and foremost, we have a committee called the Bicycle Pedestrian Safety Committee, and that's actually hosted by Orange County Government Public Works. And OCPS attends along with different representatives from the cities and different agencies. And when a specific problem at a school is identified, the committee works together and troubleshoots that problem. It often involves a site visit, and then the group makes recommendations, which we've been successful implementing at numerous locations where traffic has been an issue, whether it's the queuing line or just something operational on site. If the problem is more based on OCPS property, like the actual queuing line, but it doesn't affect the right-of-way, that's, we have an internal OCPS group that meets and deals with those issues individually. Our planning department's involved, our safety security department's involved, all the right people are at the table. So we encourage people, if they have, a specific issue, to let us know. We can bring it to one of those two groups and have a team go out and observe the problem. We do want to make sure all those problems are addressed. We don't want them to be lingering out there, so getting people on top of it right away is pretty important to us.
Okay. Well, on that, on that note, as far as I can see, do you want to address that one before?
Oh, no, I was going to go to another one.
Okay. I was just going to say that the questions that I didn't get to, for the most part, were either merged with another question or were answered in the main presentation. Daryl, is there something you want to grab?
I think there was one in regard to the 2-mile radius for busing.
Okay.
Did you?
Let me see if I saw that one. Is that one from tonight, or was that an older one?
It's on the chat.
On the chat.
I can answer it.
Yeah, can you read do you mind reading off the question?
Sure, there
Because
was
I
a
don't
question
see it.
here. Walkability is a great concept, but 2 miles is too long to expect a 5-year-old to walk. I'd love to know how many of you and the rest of the OCPS administration walk 2 miles to work every day. I'd like to answer that. No, I do not walk 2 miles every day. But that 2 mile is a state mandate that past the 2 miles, you must provide bus transportation for students to go to and from school. The funding that we receive from the state for busing is less than 50% of the cost. So I personally would love to take that to 1.5 miles, but the cost is exorbitant. And it is the thinking, people might not agree, is that 2 mile is reasonable for someone to be able to take their child there without too much inconvenience. We do not expect 5-year-olds to walk 2 miles.
Thank you for catching that. I hadn't seen that one.
And then could I just dovetail a couple of other things? I'm sure,
Absolutely.
in regard to portables, my son was in school in the mid-90s and early 2000s when schools were large, but they didn't have the class size amendment. So you didn't see necessarily as many portables because there were 25 kids in a kindergarten class.
Excellent
So
point.
I think that is one reason why the schools are sort of the same, getting up to the same size as they were before they got relieved, but you see more portables because the class size, especially in elementary schools, is kept to the
18.
Yeah, 18 and 22. So I think that's where you see more coming up.
Thank you, Daryl.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah,
Okay.
keep going.
And I just wanted to say, OCPS has some of the fastest growing areas, I think, in the nation, but we also have the largest construction program in the nation. And if you look at how much we spent in just the past few years, what we had about $175 million in 2017, $70 million in 2018, another $50 million. We do have the funding that we're putting towards these schools might not be enough to get them as quick as possible, but we are using those funds to push out as many schools and as fast as we can. It might not seem fast enough, but what I hope was shown at this panel is that there is a process, and it is an ongoing process, and it's part of the budgeting cycle and our policy cycle and everything that goes into daily operation for OCPS. And we can always, we're always looking for improvements. We're always looking for how we can address the concerns of the community. But I hope that this meeting gave more confidence to the community that there is a process. And I want to thank you all for putting so much time and effort into this presentation.
And Daryl, if I could just add, because I think that's a really excellent point that we really haven't talked about at all, which is that OCPS takes very seriously having a high quality school at the end of the process. And I think that's almost such a given that we didn't bring it up. But that's very important because at one time, historically, there was an attempt to really rush the schools in the early 90s, and a number of schools were built with just a core building with administration, media center, library, and cafeteria, cafeteria and music, art, things like that. All the individual classrooms were out at portables. And that then placed the burden on later generations as OCPS continued to grow to have to go back and replace those schools in addition to building new schools on top of it. And the last of those schools actually got replaced this year. So those children have been in portable since 1990. And so I think OCPS and the board has been very insistent that they be high quality schools, that they be complete schools when they're built. And equitable, right. And did you want to say something about the CIP or just for reference? Just for reference. Okay. Anything else that Daryl or Pam you'd like to add before we close?
I just wanted to thank you all again for the time that you've put into this. I know this was a large project. You all know your departments well, but to coordinate this amount of information into one presentation is just phenomenal. I also want to thank the community for continuing to ask questions. And it does prompt us to keep thinking outside the box, or at least to the limitations of the box as best we can. But we value the partnership and the representation we provide the community, and I look forward to doing more things like this in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And thank you.